All right. And then I'm going to flip on my end back to the gallery so I can see everyone. Hi, everybody. Happy Sunday evening. It's good to see you. I received in the mail this week the new Thoughts of Awakening. Thought I would show that to you, the book. And Jacqueline, I have one for you too. I don't know why I was shocked at how thick it was when I pulled it out. But of course it's thick because, there's like one Thought of Awakening per page. So, and there's 365 of them, plus the commentaries. So anyway, so that's out there now. I'm a little bit behind on questions. So I thought what I would do this evening is just kind of focus on catching up on the questions. And I kind of numbered the questions so that they go and, maybe in order that makes sense, even though they're unrelated, of course. And as I'm addressing a particular question, and I brought this back in case we need it. And as I'm addressing a particular question, if there are other questions related to that, I'll take them, right? So that we can try and kind of stay maybe in a flow. We'll see how it goes. Does that sound good to everyone? All right. So the first question then, this is not the order I received them, but I kind of, like I said, I kind of grouped things together. So maybe, they weren't jumping around so much. So the first question that I have is, could you deeply explain the difference, if any, between belief and faith? I know the Bible talks about thy faith has made the whole. And you talk a lot about faith, but with Byron Katie's, the work, I have really seen clearly that beliefs are believing are not where it's at. And I would also say beliefs believing is not where it's at. So I thought this was an excellent question to deeply explain the difference between belief and faith. So for me, the difference between belief and faith. Well, first of all, before I go into that, I actually want to read an answer from Michelle's homework in MPP. Michelle was contemplating Nisargadatta Maharaj, and I received her homework around the same time that I received this question. I thought, oh my gosh, these are so perfect. I asked Michelle if I could share from her homework, and she said that I could. So here's what Michelle wrote in her MPP homework. She said, Nisargadatta Maharaj says, faith is the willingness to try. And then she writes, that struck me as an exquisite statement. Faith is the willingness to put what has been read or what has been heard into practice so that true learning may occur. Faith is the willingness to keep practicing when no results are apparent. Faith is the willingness to stick with the practice through difficult and awkward phases when it seems easier to give up and then go on. So thank you, Michelle, for letting me share that. That was perfect. Faith is the willingness to try. And that was what Nisargadatta said. And then she wrote about that. But that really points to what I see as the primary difference between faith and belief. When I was first a Course in Miracles student, I used to be on these Yahoo groups, which Facebook has kind of taken the place of now. But I used to be on these Yahoo groups where people would talk about the Course. And one of the things that was really interesting about these Yahoo groups was how people argued and debated and told each other, you're wrong. To me, all of that comes from belief. Belief is, I'm going to use a very funny word. Belief is lousy. Belief is absolutely lousy. I can say that I believe we are all one and still think you're a complete jerk and I wish you'd leave me alone. It's just belief has nothing behind it. It's weak. It's lousy. It's an obstacle. And so this, of course, is why Byron Katie says that beliefs are in the way. Faith is something different. It's kind of like belief points downward, where faith points upward. So faith is really having enough trust or enough faith in truth teachings that, as Michelle wrote and as Nisargadatta said, that you're willing to do the practice. In fact, I'll tell you what else is coming to my mind. As crazy as this sounds, faith has reasonable doubt in it. In other words, faith is saying, okay, I will practice this, but I want to have the direct experience for myself. Faith is putting enough trust in what the teacher says, that if the teacher is asking you to practice in a certain way, you'll practice in that way, but you're not going to fall into believing. You want the direct experience. So you have enough faith to do the practice because you want the direct experience, where believing has nothing to do with direct experience. Believing is just, I believe it. And like I said, it's lousy, it's flimsy, it has nothing behind it. And it allows you to just keep fooling yourself. So that's what I see as the difference between faith and belief. Faith is trusting the teacher enough to put it into practice because you want to have the direct experience. You want to learn it for yourself as true. So before I move on to my next question, does anybody else want to say anything about faith or belief? And by the way, I do have 2 screens of people, so electronic hands are better because that will pop you onto the first screen. All right, then going on to question number 2. And I may have already answered this question. I have like this vague memory of answering it, but maybe I answered the person in email. Maybe I answered it here. I don't know. So if I already answered it, please forgive me. It was a 2-part question, and I'm only going to answer the first part right now because the second part is a much deeper question. And I want to stay with the light at first. But here's the question. Is awareness watching awareness meditation ignoring or not giving attention to either the wrong mind or the right-minded energy? And the answer to that is yes. That's what awareness watching awareness meditation is. Awareness watching awareness meditation is about going beyond mind entirely. You may remember a few weeks ago, I told a story about when I had these gophers in my yard, and I was all upset about the gophers, had all these imaginary stories about the gophers, and including nobody will ever buy my house. My boyfriend's going to break up with me for some reason. I can't even imagine why my mind was going there now, but I think it was. It could just go in these ridiculous places. And then I think I told you I also had the right mind there, encouraging me to breathe, to rest, accept, and trust, right? And then suddenly I realized that I saw both, that I saw the wrong mind and I saw the right mind. They were both objects to me. So I really could not be either. I was something that was beyond both. Okay, so awareness watching and awareness meditation is headed in that direction, right? It's about discovering yourself as the something that's beyond both. And so that's why when you're in awareness watching awareness meditation, you ignore both the wrong mind and the right mind. And in fact, everybody can practice in the way they want, of course, but typically on a typical day, and of course, all rules get broken. That's why I say typically. On a typical day, I contemplate first, which means I spend my time with any right-minded realizations that I need to have now, that are helping me now, moving me forward now. I spend my time with those right-minded realizations first through contemplation. When I feel done with the right-minded realizations, I feel complete for the day. That's when I go into meditation. And so because I've already received my gift from the right mind for the day, there's no reason for the right mind to bother me in meditation. It's already done its thing, right? And so now I can go into meditation and I can just ignore thought or turn my attention away from thought and shift my attention towards consciousness and focus on just staying with consciousness and not have to deal with thought at all. So for me, that's a really helpful reason to do the contemplation first and the meditation second. In addition to that, the contemplation opens the heart in a way that kind of prepares me for the meditation in a heart-centered way, rather than this, rather than just, okay, time to meditate now, with a very, dutiful way of doing it. Meditation should not be a duty. Meditation should be a love, at least in my humble opinion. So by doing the contemplation first, it opens up the heart, and then I enter into the meditation from that place of love rather than from the place of duty. Are there any questions related to that type of thing about awareness, watching awareness meditation? All right, I do have another question about meditation, so I'll jump over to that one next. This says, in lesson 34 of the 500 days, Regina gives us a guided meditation. And actually, throughout the 500 days, I give several guided meditations. In lesson 34, the 500 days, this, of course, is speaking about the 500 days with NTI. Regina gives us a guided meditation. Some meditation teachers say that the meditator should not use guided meditation or even music. That is not pure meditation. I was wondering how Regina felt about it. Well, this is funny because in a way I agree and in a way I don't. Isn't that funny? Yeah, sure. No, not really. Depending on the situation. First of all, let me just say, whenever I write a curriculum, I typically start at the beginning. I don't assume any experience. So for example, I don't assume when you start when you start 500 days with NTI, I don't assume that you've ever even meditated before. So one of the things that is happening in 500 days with NTI is I am literally teaching you to meditate. If anybody started it last year when the program was initially unveiled, they right now are in the loving consciousness method of meditation. And after loving consciousness, they'll move up to awareness, watching awareness. After that, they'll move up to self-inquiry. So one of the things that's happening is I am beginning with beginning forms of meditation and moving towards the advanced forms of meditation, which will be provided towards the end of the curriculum. So that's one thing that's happening. But what I really think about meditation is that anything that helps you to go deeper into the meditation is helpful. Anything that distracts you from going deeper into the meditation is not helpful. I mean, that's kind of like the general rule of thumb. And what helps one person to go in deeper could be a distraction for another person. So I don't think there's one rule here. I think that there were plenty of days when I would not have sat down and meditated at all if I did not give myself permission to listen to music. Therefore, the music was helpful, wasn't it? However, I think there are certain kinds of music that would be very distracting for me. Music that evokes emotion or evokes the imagination. Like some classical music. Classical music is really quite dramatic. I think that would be distracting for me in meditation. The type of music that I tend to listen to when I listen to music while I'm in meditation almost seems to be in a loop. like it'll be the same music, maybe, I don't know, I've never sat down and counted, maybe the same 16 or 24 bars of music over and over and over again, which means it doesn't really take long until the mind is almost ignoring the music, right? Because the music is just this loop. Guided meditations, I think some guided meditations are extremely helpful for some people sometimes. I think other guided meditations are not at all helpful ever. The types of meditations that are helpful are the types of meditations that settle down the mind and then shift your attention to awareness, for example. Shift your attention to the I am presence, beingness. Shift your attention to the silence that everything is happening in, right? Something like that. So the purpose of the meditation is to settle the mind down and then shift your attention to awareness in one form or another. The types of meditations that I don't think are helpful are these types of meditations where you say, imagine yourself in a golden ball and you're floating up to heaven. And now imagine yourself in a flowing white gown and imagine light coming out of your gown and imagine you're lighting up the whole world. And, and that's just all it does. That's just playing with imagination. So I don't typically perceive those types as helpful. In the very beginning, when I'm first teaching people to meditate, I do use some imagination, but I very quickly abandoned using imagination afterwards, because I don't think the purpose of meditation is to imagine. In fact, the purpose of meditation, in my opinion, is to know the true self, to focus attention on the true self. Meditation is pretty popular in the world today. And the primary purpose of meditation from the world view is peace and health. In fact, I go to my doctor once a year and she asks me a number of questions about how I eat and, how I exercise. And one of her questions is, do I meditate? And I tell her I do, and she wants to know how much, and she's always very happy. But, she's thinking that meditation, brings me peace, which is better than stress on the body, right? And that it's helpful for the health of the body. And that's the way most of the world looks at meditation. I do not, although those may be effects that can occur, I do not perceive that as the purpose of meditation. The purpose of meditation is to know yourself. In fact, let me pull out my little toy here. Y'all remember this from last week. It's Silly Putty with a little person on the end of it, right? But most of the time, attention, again, remember, we're actually consciousness, and our attention goes out and our attention is focused on the person and the world. Most of the time, our attention is here. The purpose of meditation is to move the attention as far back as possible here, eventually here, eventually here, eventually here. You see, you're moving attention back, away from the body, away from the world, away from thoughts, and shifting as far back into consciousness as you're able to go. That's the purpose of meditation. And anything that helps you to do that, if that's what's going on, it doesn't matter to me if you're playing music or, our loving consciousness audios and our watching awareness audios, where those descriptions were given to us by Michael Langford, you could call those to a point a guided meditation. They're guiding your focus, guiding your concentration, but they're not, they're guiding you back to recognize what you are and to focus on that. So when it comes to whether you should use a guided meditation or whether you should use music, I think you need to use your own discernment. If adding music enables you to sit down and meditate, it gets you over the resistance, right? Well, then to me, it's helpful, right? It's very helpful. If starting with a guided meditation, especially like a half-hour guided meditation that's leading your focus into awareness, and then the meditation kind of goes quiet, and if you have more time, you stay there with that focus, that's helpful as far as I can tell. But anything that distracts your attention away from that purpose is not helpful. So hopefully that answers the question. Does anybody else have anything? In fact, one other thing that's in the 500 days that this person probably hasn't gotten to yet, since it says in lesson 34, later there's going to be meditations where you're sitting and watching videos. But what happens when you're sitting and watching these videos, if you choose to use them, the videos are also in loops. And what happens at some point is the mind, the eyes are looking at the videos, so it kind of gives the eyes something to do, but your attention can shift in a meditative way. And it's better, actually, and many people have discovered this, it's better for some people, especially in an early stage, to watch something like a video, a certain type of video, when they're meditating. Because if they close the eyes, the thoughts there about my problems, my day, my world, what so-and-so said to me are so loud and so personal, they just sit there thinking is really what happens. These videos are not personal. They're typically like nature scenes or maybe animals eating grass or, there's something like that, right? But they give your eyes something to focus on to the point that you aren't lost in your own thought. So these types of meditation videos can be very helpful for beginners as well. In fact, open-eyed meditation can be very, very helpful because you close your eyes and then it's like, okay, now I'm just lost in my own thought. So, what's helpful and what's not helpful really depends on your stage, where you're at. But as long as you know the goal of meditation and you're always moving towards that goal, then you can discern for yourself what's most helpful to you today. Anything else about meditation? All right. Then question number 4. This was actually John. There he is. He asked us, I think during the first or second night, he says, I'm not familiar with what the 4 principles of God are. And to be honest, all of the other questions that I've received, in order to answer those questions, I really need to refer to the 4 principles of God. So I think what we're going to go into now are the 4 principles of God. I want to start by telling you that when you look at this little visual aid with the little person at the end and then the long snaky attention going into the ball of consciousness, you don't have all 4 principles. This is only maybe you could call this 3 principles of God. So I just want you to know that whenever we're talking about waking up to the fact that you are consciousness, we're only talking about waking up to the 2nd principle of God. And I'm going to get into more detail about that in a moment. But that's one of the most important things, one of the things that here in Awakening Together, we're luckiest to know. Because a lot of people out there don't know that. A lot of people out there think that when you've awakened to consciousness or awakened to the I Am Presence, you have awakened all the way. And in fact, I interviewed Liz Cronkite, a couple of weeks ago, and she also knows this. She also has this realization of the 4 principles of God. She uses different words, but she has the same realization. And I asked her why she thought it was important to know that. And, I don't remember the exact words of her answer, but basically her answer was something like, well, if you don't know that, then you aren't all the way awake and you think you are. So you think you're awake and you're not awake. And she just, like I do, felt it was really important to know the difference between the 1st principle of God and the 2nd principle of God. Of course, one of the teachers that I ran across, which she also ran across, was Bernadette Roberts. And Bernadette Roberts does the best job I've ever seen anywhere of explaining the difference between what I call the first principle of God and the second principle of God, although again, she doesn't use those words. Those words are mine. And this realization came to me in, I believe it was May of 2012. And what happened in 2012 was I took a year off from almost all of my work for what I called increased silence. I call it increased silence rather than a year of silence because, again, I was still a mother. I still had a daughter that came home from work at 4 o'clock every day, and I had to go back to being a mother. But, you know, the bus picked her up around 7, didn't drop her off till around 4. And between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m., I was in silence and I was in contemplation, except for maybe walking the dog. I had a dog. I'm sure I took a walk every day. I was contemplating the 7 steps to awakening. And at this moment, I don't remember which quote I was contemplating, but I was contemplating one day, and my awareness, I don't know how else to say this, what I am aware of, therefore my awareness went backwards, just like it was traveling. Just like it was traveling on this little visual aid, it went backwards from the person, backwards through attention, backwards to consciousness, and then off of that completely into what's beyond consciousness. And my reaction was like, of course, my reaction when I came back, because there is no reaction when you're there, but my reaction when I came back was like, oh my God. It was just like, oh my God. I mean, up until that moment, I had no idea. Now, when I go back and look at, you know, Nisargadatta Maharaj and A Course in Miracles and Ramana Maharshi, you know, I see this teaching all over them. I didn't see this teaching until I had the experience myself. It was just like an, oh my God. And what I told Liz is, to me, this was kind of a secret. In fact, someone else that realized this on about the same day that I realized it was Bentinho Massaro. And the reason I know Bentinho realized it about the same day that I realized it is there was a Facebook group that he and I were both in. And he came into that Facebook group all excited about what he had just realized. He called it beyond the experiencer, is what he called it at that time. He was so excited, and he came in and he was telling people about this realization. And what was so funny to me was some of the words in his post were like the same words I'd just written in my journal. You'd think he had read my journal and copied it, but it's right here on notebook paper. That's the only place it was. He couldn't have copied it. I mean, the realizations were just so much alike. But what happened when he went in and made this post was all of these people began attacking his realization. And in effect saying that that was not true, that consciousness was all the further that one could go, that Bentinho had lost it. And after a few days, they kicked him out of that group. And so probably what this did was this instilled in me a doubt that anybody else wanted to know. You know, like people don't want to know the truth. You know, it's kind of like the old quote, you can't handle the truth, right? I mean, that's kind of how it hit me. People don't want to know the truth. And so it was some time, I don't know how long, probably about a couple of years before I even began to talk about it. And when I began to talk about it, I began to talk about it very slowly at first, very carefully at first. When I really began to talk about it most directly was when I was developing the gentle healing curriculum. Because when we got to the part of the course where the course was really pointing to these 4 principles of God, and I hadn't seen it when I was studying the course, and I know other people don't necessarily see it when they're studying the course, I couldn't help but use this model, the 4 principles of God, to say, hey, here's what the course is saying here. So that's when I really began to talk about it. The language is mine. I made up the terms, the first principle of God, the second principle of God, the third principle of God, and the fourth principle of God. The reason I call them principles of God is because I think it's really important to know that all of it is God. You know, it's not like God is the first principle, but not the second, or God is the first and second principle, but not the third, or that it's the first 3, but not the fourth. It's all God. And so that's why I called it the first, second, third, and fourth principles of God. So with that said, let me share my screen and we will start to go into this. So this is my little chart. I'm going to start at the bottom. The reason I'm starting at the bottom is because this is what the known is, and the first principle is the unknown. So I want to start with what you know and move backwards. So what I call the fourth principle of God is basically manifestation. It's what, some spiritual teachings call the dream, or what some spiritual teachings call the illusion. That's the fourth principle of God. But it includes the person, right? All persons. It includes the world. It includes the universe. It includes all thought. It includes all emotion. It includes all images. It even includes experiences of afterlife, such as near-death experiences. It even includes things like if you were to have reincarnation, regression, and remember a previous life, that's a part of the fourth principle. It includes everything paranormal. If you were to see a ghost, it includes the ghost. If you were to see an extraterrestrial or a UFO, it includes that. In fact, the way Michael Langford points to this is he says, almost every word in the dictionary, he says, is a part of the ego's illusion. In other words, his ego's illusion is my fourth principle of God. Almost every word in the dictionary points to the ego's illusion or points to the fourth principle of God. And this to me is the first thing that's really important for spiritual students to know. Because what a lot of spiritual students think is that some things that happen here in the fourth principle of God are truth. And nothing that happens here in the fourth principle of God is truth. The right mind happens here in the fourth principle of God. When Regina Dawn Akers is listening to an inner dictation that's teaching her, pointing her towards truth, and she's calling that the Holy Spirit, and she's writing this book called The Holy Spirit's Interpretation of the New Testament, that's happening here in the fourth principle of God. Same thing with Helen Schuckman, listening to a Jesus and transcribing a book called A Course in Miracles, or the book itself, A Course in Miracles, or who was that lady, was her name Glenda Green, who saw Jesus and painted him? Was that her name? All these types of things are still fourth principle of God. In fact, if you look at NTI Revelation, let me go ahead and do that. Let me pull that up on my Kindle. It's funny sometimes when I realize stuff, it's like, wow, I was told that a long time ago, but I didn't really understand it until I realized it for myself. And I know you guys have had the same experience. But I scribed Revelation long before having this realization that you're seeing here. But listen, it's right here in NTI Revelation chapter 1, starting with the second paragraph. It says, the world is an illusion. And so everything you experience as you let go of the world is illusion also. You are not to believe any of it. But then listen to the next sentence. But helpful symbols will be given to guide you. Remember that they are only symbols. Follow them, realizing you know not where they lead. So things like A Course in Miracles, NTI, hearing an inner right-minded voice, these are helpful symbols that are sent to guide you, but they aren't truth, right? They aren't truth. And what happens when we get into the believing, we talked about believing and faith earlier. When we get into the believing, maybe I'm a course student and I believe Helen Schuckman listened to Jesus, and I believe the course is the truth. And then I also believe some of these other books like Way of Mastery, NTI, they're not truth, right? And I start arguing with people, right? I mean, this is what believing does, right? Believing leaves you stuck in thought. Whatever thoughts you've identified with, to be absolutely honest. So if you're identified with being a course student, you're going to be more likely to get defensive if somebody else doesn't believe something in the course, right? So what this is saying, listen to this again. The world is an illusion. And so everything you experience as you let go of the world is illusion also. And then this sentence is actually italicized. You are not to believe any of it. So we're not to believe A Course in Miracles. We're not to believe NTI. Buddha said, don't believe me. We're not to believe Buddha. Maybe have faith in them so that we can try the practices they point to and move in the direction that they're pointing so we can have a direct experience ourselves, but we're not to believe them. Isn't that interesting? So it's good that we had that question about belief and faith earlier. It kind of helped with this, didn't it? You are not to believe any of it, but then it also says, but helpful symbols will be given to guide you. Remember that they are only symbols. That'll keep you from believing them. You see? Remember that they are only symbols. Follow them. Just because they aren't real doesn't mean we don't follow them. We're just being clear that this is a helpful symbol that's come into this dream to wake me up, rather than thinking that's the truth. You see, it's clarity. So helpful symbols will be given to guide you. Remember that they are only symbols. Follow them, realizing you know not where they lead. You don't have any idea what the truth is. You don't have any idea what the truth is. That's important to know from the very beginning. The next paragraph says, do not idolize anything within the world or any symbol or any thought that is sent to lead you from the world. So don't idolize A Course in Miracles. Don't idolize NTI. Don't idolize your spiritual teacher. Don't idolize spiritual teachers from the past like Jesus or Ramana Maharshi. Don't idolize anything, this says. When you idolize something, you've identified with it, which means you've taken it on as a part of your persona, right? And so that's actually, then this thing that was sent to help you actually becomes another obstacle. So do not idolize anything within the world or any symbol or any thought that is sent to lead you from the world. hold to them as they're useful. See, it's not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. Isn't that funny? I mean, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If A Course in Miracles is useful, pay attention to it. If Thich Nhat Hanh is useful, pay attention to it. If Ramana Maharshi is helpful, pay attention to him, Do not idolize them, but pay attention to them. That's the difference. So do not idolize anything within the world or any symbol or any thought that is sent to lead you from the world. Hold to them as they are useful, but let them go when their usefulness has passed. And then this sentence has always been one of my favorite sentences. You are to keep moving by letting go until you find yourself with nothing to hold on to. So these two paragraphs are really telling us how to awaken from the fourth principle of God all the way up to the first principle of God, especially this last sentence about you are to keep moving by letting go. So the fourth principle of God, again, is not just wrong mind. The fourth principle of God includes right mind. It's manifestation. So some of what's in the fourth principle of God keeps you focused on the fourth principle as if it's reality. And if it keeps you focused on the fourth principle as if it's reality, then it keeps you from knowing yourself or keeps you from knowing the truth. But some of what's in the fourth principle of God is actually here to point up and away, right? Up and away. And that is still not truth, but it's the path towards truth. All right, Martha, I see your hand. So why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
I wondered if the fourth principle is also wherein the allowance of duality comes from.
Say that again.
I wondered if in the fourth principle, at some point, somewhere, duality enters into the question. At least for me, it does in the manifestation. So I wondered if that's.
I don't know if I'm just not understanding you, or if the question to me is so obvious I don't even see it as a question. I mean,
maybe.
Fourth principle and duality are synonymous.
Aha, okay. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, is that what you're asking?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, they are synonymous. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else about the fourth principle before I move up to the third principle?
Cindy has her hand up.
Oh, Cindy. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Cindy's hand was almost the color of her wall. I couldn't see it. Go ahead, Cindy.
So it's another one of those things that it just lights up. I heard you say multiple times, not true.
Not true.
And my mind keeps saying that doesn't mean false. And so,
it means not real. Right? Not
that
real.
doesn't, yeah, there's a hiccup in my brain that keeps saying not true equals false. No, it doesn't. And then there's just an invitation, or, if you could speak to that, just.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, one of the things that was helpful to me, sometimes the silliest stuff has been helpful to me. So you guys are just going to have to forgive me and my silliness. But one of the things that was really helpful to me happened a long time ago when Jasmine was young, and I would watch cartoons with her. And we were watching this cartoon called Jimmy Neutron Kid Genius or something like that. Some of you guys may know Jimmy Neutron. And there was this one particular cartoon where Jimmy's friend Carl was afraid to go to sleep at night because he was having these horrible dreams. There was some monster chasing him, and it happened like every night. And Carl was afraid to go to sleep. And of course, Jimmy wanted to help Carl. And remember, Jimmy's like this kid genius. So in this cartoon, Jimmy builds this machine where he can go into this machine, and then while Carl is dreaming, he can project himself into Carl's dream, and then he can give Carl guidance to help him. And so that's what happens. He goes into Carl's dream, and Carl's dream is really crazy. The monster ends up being a big piece of broccoli, But when Jimmy's in the dream, he's trying to help Carl see you don't need to be afraid of a big piece of broccoli, and he's talking to him in the dream because he can see the dream, and he's talking to him in the dream. When I saw that, that's when I realized that the Holy Spirit is a manifestation. Because the Jimmy Neutron in the dream was not the Jimmy Neutron in the box, outside of the dream that could see in the dream. You know what I mean? It was an image. And so that's when I understood that the Holy Spirit is also part of the dream, just like the Jimmy Neutron that was talking to Carl and saying, hey, look, it's just broccoli, was in the dream. But Jimmy Neutron was never actually in the dream. He was in a box outside of the dream, right? So that's when I began to understand that this right-minded stuff that comes in to help us wake up is still a part of the dream. Now, whether you call that false or not would depend on your definition of false, but it's not reality. Right? But again, there's right-minded and wrong-minded. Those are the terms I'm using here because they come from the Course. The main difference between a right-minded thought and a wrong-minded thought is that the wrong-minded thought is keeping your attention focused on the world as if the world is the truth. So for example, when I'm worried about money, for example, if I'm worried about, do I have enough money to retire? My attention is on the world as if the world is the truth, as if, I need money for my safety. That's wrong-minded. A right-minded thought is a thought that is pointing you towards the truth. So for example, a right-minded thought that might come in, if I'm worried about money, the right-minded thought that might come in might be, notice the fear right now. Notice you're paying attention to fear. Notice you're believing fear. Okay, now instead, let's breathe. Let's let this fear pass through. Let's trust. And in fact, a lot of my right-minded thoughts had to do with the third principle, which we haven't talked about yet, but it might point to the third principle and how if I'm believing fear, I'm going to create my own experience of fear, right? And point me just to let go of the fear and move to trust. So again, wrong-minded thoughts point to the world as if it's true, and it's not true. Right-minded thoughts point towards the truth that's beyond the world. But neither one of them is truth. They're both manifestations within the dream. One is just like Jimmy Neutron being projected in to help us out. Does that help you, Cindy?
Yes, I mean, what I basically heard was right-minded thinking is like that channel leading us, and wrong-minded thinking will just take us more into the darkness of manifestation.
Yes, thank you.
And that's all I really have to focus on right now.
Yes. Marisol.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Regina.
Hi.
I just wanted to clarify to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So like, let's say Holy Spirit is based in truth and it's manifesting into the dream to help us out of the dream.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's kind of like its footing is in truth, right? And it's pointing back towards truth, but it's not truth itself. And in fact, as you're awakening, you will come to see that things that the Holy Spirit told you in the beginning, because they were helpful to you in the beginning, weren't at all true. I mean, they just weren't at all true. Like you'll transcend even a lot of what the Holy Spirit told you, but it got you to turn around, and you had to be turned around. And one example of that is in Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth. Somewhere near the beginning of the book, he's telling you about the inner body and how to focus on the inner body, right? As a way of stilling the mind. At the end of the book, he tells you there's no inner body. You see? So even though the Holy Spirit points towards truth, or the right mind points towards truth, it doesn't actually always even speak truth. And in fact, the funny thing is, this is what Jimmy Neutron learned in the cartoon. If we go back to the Jimmy Neutron cartoon, when he first went into the cartoon, he was telling Carl, you don't need to be afraid of broccoli. Broccoli can't hurt you. And Carl wasn't hearing that at all. So what Jimmy learned was, in order to talk to Carl, he had to meet Carl where he was. And of course, I haven't seen the cartoon in a long time, so I don't remember the details. But, compared to real life, some of what he was telling Carl was just ridiculous. But it was at least starting to make Carl step away from his fear. And then as Carl stepped away from his fear more and more, Jimmy could be more and more honest with him about the truth. The right mind is actually the same way. We had a meeting recently. We were talking about transcribing, because I've given permission for this teaching to be transcribed. And we were talking about transcribing some of my earlier teachings. And I said, I didn't want them transcribed. And I gave him a couple of reasons, but one of them was, to me, those teachings sound infantile now. Right? Certain parts of them I still think are helpful, and I'm putting those on YouTube. But, although all of that was helpful to me at one time, all of it was helpful, it sounds a little more infantile now. It sounds more like, what Jimmy Neutron probably said to Carl in the beginning of the dream, rather than at the end of the dream, when Carl was ready for more truth. So again, the right mind is turning you around and pointing you in the right direction, and it's meeting you where you're at. But not even what it says is 100% true. Doesn't mean you shouldn't trust it and follow it. Right now, you're scared of broccoli chasing you around. You need some help. Right?
That makes a lot of sense. And also it demonstrates the kindness and gentleness of the Holy Spirit.
Yes. And when you're ready for higher and higher truths, you'll get them. Right? Yeah. Any other question? I probably won't even go to the third principle tonight because of the time. We'll probably just go ahead and stay here with this fourth principle. So if you have other questions about this fourth principle, now's a great time to ask them. Or about, what we're talking about, how even the right mind isn't truth. Points towards truth isn't truth. All right, let's see. UN.
So maybe you will mention this, or maybe later, I don't know, just that divine law, is that only apply to fourth principle?
The third principle of God is divine law. So that's what I'll go over next week.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go over that next week. We'll start there next week. And I thought I saw George's hand. George, did you put your hand down? Oh, there you are. Did you have something to say?
Yes. You once said that the whole purpose of reading materials, retreats, videos, and all that was to drive you to practice.
Yeah.
I assume that we're talking about the same thing here, because practice is the only place you'll find truth.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that statement.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably a hidden question in what you just said is, what's the use of understanding the four principles of God? And I think the two uses of understanding the four principle of God. One is when you understand that everything in the fourth principle is not true, you can, if you choose to, stop being attached to anything in the fourth principle. Right? Like I said, even if it's, even if Jesus shows up every night and sits at the foot of your bed and teaches you, you can understand this is the dream teaching me to wake up. That's actually going to help you more than if you became very attached to feeling special because Jesus comes and talks to you every night. You see? So it allows you to skim what's here, take what's useful, but still understand that all of this is dream. And so you take what's useful and you keep moving rather than becoming stuck in some spiritual teachings. And people do become stuck in spiritual teachings. They become identified with spiritual teachings and stuck in them. So if you understand this, it will help you to avoid that trap. When you understand, at least when I understood the third principle of God, which I'll talk about next week, that really starts helping you to let go of placing attention on certain thoughts, because certain thoughts seem so friggin' important, you know, like having enough money, for example. But when you understand that when you're placing attention on certain thoughts, you're creating experiences with that energy, and you really get that pretty soon, you become smart enough. Wait a minute. I don't want to create experiences from this energy. I'm just going to let this go. You start being able to let go of those wrong-minded thoughts much faster. When you understand that the second principle of God is the way station prior to full awakening, you don't awaken to the second principle of God and then think, okay, I'm done. You realize you're not done. You're at this wonderful way station, this wonderful rest spot, but the ego is actually still here. And you can continue in whatever way you need to continue that allows you to continue to progress towards full awakening. So in that way, knowing this stuff is helpful, right? And Joe, I see your hand. We only have a minute, so let's see if we can cover this quickly.
Okay, real quick. Thank you, Regina. I've seen you do this presentation on the fourth principle of God, four principles of God several times, and kind of connected to what George mentioned is that each time I am inspired to practice more. It's just more of an inspiration each time you go through it. And this question is probably pretty minor, but using your little silly putty thing.
Yeah.
The two ways that the word self is used, the small s self, I think is pretty self-explanatory what that is. Would the capital S self be the pure consciousness, or would it be the first principle of God?
And actually that depends on who you're talking to. Yeah,
Okay.
that's some people call consciousness the capital S self. And some people are referring to the first principle when they say capital S self.
Beyond.
So unfortunately, that's not consistent. So you have to listen to more about what they're talking about to see where they're putting that word.
Yeah. Okay.
In Buddhism is easier because Buddhism would refer to the first principle of God as the no self. So that's because their language is so clear. But with Hinduism, and also with Westerners, self could mean either one. So you have to listen a little harder.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we are out of time. So next week, we now know where I'm going. I'm going into the third principle of God. And Anne, I will finally get to your question when we get to the third principle, because it's related to that. And Anne was the first person to ask a question. And yet, I haven't gotten to it yet, but it's not that I've forgotten. All right. Bye, everyone.